This video is going to demonstrate how to do the animation basics in Photoshop. Once you're in Blackboard, click on the demo files link and then scroll down to O5 Basic Animation Demo and click to download the files. That will download a zip file for you. Navigate to that zip file and extract it by double clicking on it. And then once you get the folder, you're going to see that there are a couple of files inside of there. We're going to be working with most of these today, so I'm just going to select all of them and choose to open with Photoshop. Once Photoshop opens up those files, we actually want to start with the one that has the 3 circles on it, the circles.psd. At this point, if you have anything else open or running on your computer, it'd be a good idea to save it. Animation does take up a lot of memory on your computer, and it would be helpful for you if you would save and close out of everything. Okay, so whenever you're animating in Photoshop, one of the first things that you need to know is anything that you want to change, which is what animation is a change over time, you have to have it on its own layer. So in this case, I have 3 circles and I want them each to do something different. So I had to put them on their own layer. If they were all on the same layer, then they would have to animate the exact same way at the exact same time. So the first rule that you need to know is that if something is going to animate, it needs to be on its own layer. Speaking of animation, we need to be able to see our timeline. So up in your menu bar, what you're going to do is choose Window, and then come down here and choose Timeline. That's going to open up your timeline panel. Usually it opens up at the bottom. Once it does that, you want to click Create Video Timeline. What that will do is automatically take all of your layers and it will put them on its own video layer. Once it's on its own video layer, you can hit the arrow right next to the name of the layer. This is another reason why you want to make sure that your layers are named. And you're going to see a couple of properties that you can animate with a stopwatch next to them. In this case, I can animate the position, the opacity, and the style of the red circle. The same thing is true for the blue and the green. In the timeline, you have playback playback icon menus, as well as a few other things such as settings. I tend to keep my playback on loop, so that way it will constantly play back through over and over again. So that means once it reaches the end of my work area, which at this point is right here, it is automatically going to jump back at the beginning and play again. You can always uncheck that if you want, but in this case, I like to keep it on. We'll be looking at some of these other icons later. What you need to know is that your playback is set to a different time than what you might be used to. In this case, it is set to 30 FPS, which is 30 frames per second. So whenever the playback head, which is this indicator right here, is going through your timeline, you have a time indicator down here, a time code. The way that you're going to read this is the first, or I should say the last number here, which is the first number that we actually see, that is the frame that we're on. So we're on frame 17. And if you watch that as I scrub through the playback, once it reaches 29 and then it goes to 1 second. Okay, so there's 28, 29, and then automatically 1 second. So at every 30th frame, that is 1 second. So there are 30 frames, 30 still images, if you will, to make up 1 second. And that is what we're working with. Okay, so you've got frames, you've got seconds, you've got minutes, and you've got hours. We're mostly going to be working with seconds and frames for the animations that we are going to be doing. So right now you'll see here's 10 frames, here's 20 frames, and then here's 1 second. Here's 1 second and 10 frames in, 1 second and 20 frames in, and so on. Okay, so let's go ahead and focus on just animating this first red circle. I'm going to zoom in on it so you can see it a little bit better. And we are going to focus on animating its position. So I am going to twirl down the red, and you want to make sure that you have it selected. So if you notice just now, I still had the green one selected, and you can even see that in my layers panel. I had to click on red. Okay, so with these stopwatches, anything that you want to animate, you have to first activate the stopwatch. So I'm going to make sure that my playback head is at the very beginning, so the time code reads all zeros, and I'm going to click the stopwatch. I'm doing that here because I know that this is where I want its starting position to be. If I didn't want it to be right there, then I would just move it to wherever I want it to be. But in this case, it's going to start here. So let's say that once, we're 1 second in, I want the red circle to be over here. Well, I'm going to move my playback head over to 1 second. I'm going to make sure my move tool is active, and I'm going to click and drag, holding shift to keep it in a straight line. I'm going to drag it to the other side of the screen. Once I do that, you'll notice that it automatically puts a keyframe in for me. A keyframe is just this diamond icon right here. That's indicating that something is happening in this spot. So at 0 seconds, it was over here. At 1 second, it's here. So Photoshop is going to do the transition between those two times. So if I play back, if I kind of scrub back through the timeline, you'll see it play. I can hit the play button here, and you'll see that it's not moving because there are no other keyframes here. But once it reaches the end, it will just kind of automatically jump back to the beginning. Now, if you don't want to wait that long for your animation to happen, you have your work area up here, which is indicated by this left or starting area and the ending area on the right here. So if I put my cursor over one of those edges, I can click and drag. And now what will happen is that it will only loop through this segment. So I can play. Now, if I had a really complicated or complex animation or a large file size, the first time it renders through, it might not play back nicely. Let it go through that first time and then play it again, and that second time it should look nice. I don't have to stop there. If I wanted to, I could come back to, maybe I'll do, maybe I can switch it up. So I'll come to my 1 second and 20 frames in, and you don't have to use the exact same time code as I am, but maybe at this point I want it to go back this way, right? And then maybe I'll move it down a little bit further, and I'm like, no, I want it to go back this way. And maybe here I'm going to say, no, I want it to go there. And then so here I'm just kind of like making it fight with itself, right? So it's going to kind of go jagged there for a few. Bounce, 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 and then back. If you want things to happen quicker, keep the keyframes closer together. So look at how long it takes to get from here to here. Watch. It's kind of long, right? If I move these keyframes closer together, now look how quick. So the closer the keyframes are together, the quicker the time. The further apart they are, the longer it's going to take. Okay, so between here and here, if I move this keyframe down, look at how long. Okay, that's kind of a slow time. So you can change the pace of your animation by just making your keyframes be closer together or further apart. Let's say that I wanted this red circle to stay there and be there for a couple of frames before it moves. That's referred to as a hold keyframe. So what you can do is, in this case, since I want it to just stay right there, move your timeline, your playback head to right here on your timeline, and then just hit the keyframe icon, which is right here. That will automatically put in another keyframe, and look, it won't move. It's not moving. But let's say that right here, I want it to go back to the same position that it was in here. All right, so I want it to go from here to here, hold, and then once the timeline playback gets right here, I want it to go back to the position it was at this keyframe. What I'm going to do is right-click on that keyframe and choose Copy, put my playback head where I want the new keyframe to be, and then click the keyframe icon, and then I need to right-click and paste. I'm telling it to you this way because a lot of times Control-C, Command-C, and Control-V or Command-V do not always work with this. All right, so now it's going to go back to that same spot. Look, there, hold, and then it goes back. All right, so that's how you can get it to kind of go back to its original position. Okay, so you saw that little pause in there, and that's indicated by that. Okay, so that's moving position. Something else that you can animate is opacity. Now, let's say, I'm going to twirl this up. Let's say that, I have my animation starting right at the beginning for the red circle. Let's say that I don't want the blue circle to start changing its opacity until the red circle reaches right here. Okay, reaches the other side. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump to that keyframe. And one way that you can quickly jump to that keyframe is by hitting this arrow. So these arrow keys next to the keyframe icon here is going to automatically put you on that keyframe. So I'm going to lock in the opacity here by clicking the stopwatch icon. And then I am going to go to, we'll just say, frame 10. And then I'm going to hit the keyframe icon, and then I'm going to come in here and change the opacity. I'm going to change it to 0. And that's going to animate the opacity. All right, but watch, nothing is going to happen at the beginning. If I take this and I bring it all the way back to the beginning, then it animates the opacity that entire time. But that's not what I wanted. I wanted it to wait until, sometime later. Opacity is a good way to kind of do a show and hide. So if you want something to just look like it kind of blinks and appears, then that's just an opacity setting. So in this case, again, I can kind of adjust the opacity some more. So like maybe right here, I want it to just be kind of faded. And then here, I want it to kind of go back to 0. And then all the way here, maybe we'll come back to 100%. Okay, so it kind of blinked a little bit, so you can also do blinking like that. So a couple of different options there. And the other thing to keep in mind too is if I did want this moving around, if I wanted the blue one moving around, I could also animate the position as well. Lastly, we are going to animate the layer style on the green circle. So if I double click the green circle, we'll see that there is a drop shadow on it. So what I want to do with the green circle is animate the drop shadow. So I will start maybe right here, and I'm going to click the stopwatch icon for style, and that's telling it to be this is this is the starting point for this particular layer. And what I'm going to do is maybe come down further. I'll put another keyframe in, and then I'm going to bring up the layer style again. I'm going to go to drop shadow, and I'm just going to click in here and drag it on over and then hit OK. So what that's going to do is it's going to make it like it kind of changed the light. Okay, watch the green. Okay, so it kind of looks like light has changed, right? You can do this with a bunch of different things with layer style. So it is kind of a neat thing to kind of play around with the layer style. So I could come back in again, drop shadow, maybe this time bring it up here. Okay, now it's kind of moving around in a circle. So you can kind of animate that so many different ways. Okay, so those were just some of the basics moving into how to animate in Photoshop. So that was position and opacity and style, so layer styles. Remember that you could also animate any combination of those three. It doesn't just have to be one at a time. All right, so that's all for this document. I would advise you to save this so you could always come back in and look at your keyframes. I am going to close it without saving, but again, I do advise you to save it so you would have it. The next thing that we want to look at is the 2.5D parallax. So this is actually a common effect that we see with animations, and so I want to show this to you. So I'm actually going to zoom in just a tiny bit just to show you. So we've got a person and then we've got the background. So they're completely separate there. Okay, so let's go ahead. If you don't have the video timeline up again, then you would just go to Window and Timeline. And then once it appears, go ahead and create video timeline. Okay, so with this one, with the 2.5D parallax, what we're going to do is an effect that kind of just looks like an odd zoom. Like it's going to kind of have like this weird feel to it, but it's going to look like we're kind of zooming in. So in order to get this to happen, we need to transform these. So if I look at the background and I look at the person, we now have an option for transform instead of position. So why is that different? It's because they're smart objects. If these weren't smart objects, then this would just say position. But if you want to animate its rotation or its scale or skew or anything like that, it has to be a smart object. All right, so transform will still animate the position, but in this case, we're just worried about the scaling. So I'm going to activate the stopwatch for transform for both of them at the beginning. And then let's just go to 2 seconds. And again, I'm going to be on the background. I'm going to hit Command or Control T. Okay, Command or Control T. And what I'm going to do is hold down Option or Alt, and I'm just going to scale it up. Maybe about like that. And then hit Return. I want to be at this same spot because I want these animations to happen at the same time. I'm going to click on Person, hit Command or Control T, and using the center of the top bounding box, I'm just going to click and drag down just a tiny bit. You don't want to make her too small. And wait until you see this effect. It's actually kind of neat, and it is kind of a common one that you see. Okay, so it's kind of like giving you this sense that, you know, we're just kind of like small in the grand scheme of things. So that's called a 2.5D parallax effect. And I just wanted to kind of show you that it is really quick and it is effective. Like I could definitely see this working for an advertisement. And, you know, now that you have room up here in the sky, you could add some text in, or, you know, so many different things that you could kind of do with this. But again, you don't get the transform unless you have made your layers into smart objects. And the way that you make a layer into a smart object is by right-clicking on it, and you would go to create smart object or convert to smart object right here. Okay, so they were already done. That was already done for us, so we didn't have to. But I did want to make sure that I pointed that out because you won't get transform unless you make it a smart object. All right, let's go ahead and close that one. Again, I would save it so that way you can come back to it and see how this works. And I would always go in and advise you to play around with scaling. So actually, let me just cancel this for a minute. And if you closed it, that's fine. Just kind of watch here. I'm going to actually undo this. And instead of doing the scale the way that I did, what I always advise students to do is just, you know, just kind of play with it. Like what happens if I just scale, what if I just scaled this way? All right, so that might look a little bit different. Like what if I just kind of scale it a little bit like that? And then for the person, I just kind of, whoops, I gotta select the person, come in and scale it just a little bit more like that. Okay, so I always advise kind of come in and play around with these because you never know how it's gonna look. Okay, that's kind of neat. She looks just a little bit extra tiny in the grass and the weeds here, but that could be kind of neat. You know, just depending on how you do it. So don't be afraid to kind of play around with it. It doesn't have to be exactly the way that I show you. Feel free to experiment and have fun. Okay, so now that you've seen a little bit about position, opacity, style, and transform, now let's talk about timing. Okay, and kind of talked about that a little bit in the first one with the circles, but I want to talk about it a little bit more here. All right, so we've got the background. We kind of have this jumper. And we also have this text called jump, and the jump text already has warp applied to it. I'm going to hit create video timeline. Okay, so I have the video timeline here. So what I want to do is I want to make it look like, I'm going to have select my move tool. I want to make it look like this person kind of jumps up, and then once it jumps up here, the text kind of arcs a little bit more, and then the person just kind of continues down. Now this is a little bit harder to do. Photoshop wasn't meant to do all streamlined types of animation, but I think this would definitely help out. This would definitely help out in doing something like this. So I wanted to show you a little bit on how you would go about doing this. So first I would start with position, and I would start with style. So there is a color overlay on this. Okay, so there is a color overlay on this, and I think that maybe we can do something neat with color in reaction to where the jumper is. Okay, so I'm going to zoom in just a little bit more. Again, I have my move tool active, and this is really just going to be a trial and error. Okay, I'm only going to focus on the jumper first, so I'm going to go a little bit at a time, and I'm going to say, okay, maybe like right there. I'm going to actually, let me go back one. I want him to kind of start off a little bit more here, I think. I had to do this back at the beginning because if I came here and then I moved him, look, it put in a keyframe and that's not what I wanted. Okay, so maybe right here, he goes up a little bit. And look, it's automatically putting that keyframe in for me. So I'm gonna go kind of like equal distance here and, you know, keep scrubbing through that timeline, making sure that looks pretty smooth. Okay, a little bit more, see if we can get all the way up there. Okay, so that's good. So now we can start the descent. So let's just kind of pretend that that was where we wanted him to jump up. Oop. Sometimes you just got to play it and see. All right, so go there, come down a little bit further. And we could have rotated him too, but I think you guys get the idea. All right, maybe bring him down just a little bit further. All right, so if we play it, okay, so we've got a little bit of like an oddity in there, right? Like, okay, so I would say right around, he goes too far to the side. So this keyframe right here, I would just inch him back some. Let's see. Okay, come back here. Maybe I want him to be just a little bit further back. And this is really what you have to do with the animation. Okay, he's got a little bit of a stops right there, so maybe when he comes up, this one he's over just a little bit. Okay, let's see now. All right, so that's better. Goes a little bit fast on the end, but I think you guys get the idea. So with this, it really is just kind of about going back and forth and looking at the movement. Okay, so what I'm gonna do here is I want to select all these keyframes and move them out just a little bit. So I'm gonna click right here where there is nothing, click and drag, and see how I made a marquee around them, and now they're all selected. So now I can just move them a little bit. Okay, I'm gonna jump back to the beginning with this icon right here. All right, so good enough. All right, so now, again, I'm gonna go back to the beginning with right here. And now what I wanna do is go to the next keyframe, and I actually kind of like it that the color animates the way that it does. But let's say right here I want to keep the style, and right here I want to keep the style. But then right here, let's say I want to go to color overlay, and yeah, I want it to just be like darker like that. So come in, and then once he gets right here, I want it to go back to being that darker color. So again, I'm going to select this keyframe because I want it to be the darker color that he is here. I'm going to copy it. This is where I want him to be the darker color again. So I'm going to click the keyframe icon and then right click and paste. Okay, so watch the color. It's just the color now. So it looks like he's kind of getting that flare from the sun as he goes right there. Okay, so next with jump, I'm going to put a stopwatch keyframe right here at the beginning. And I don't want jump to bevel until about right there. So I'm going to put another keyframe. And then once it gets like right there, I want that warp to happen. So I'm going to right click on the text layer in the layers panel, and I'm going to go down to warp text, and I am just going to make that text warp some more. And then hit OK. Okay, so it's going to go warp, and then maybe I'll copy the keyframe, put it right here. So I'm going to highlight this, right click, copy. This is where I want the other one to be, so I'm going to put a new keyframe there and then paste. It might be too soon. Yep, it's too soon. Let's drag this out some. Even still. Okay, let's try this now. There we go, that looks better. So it's a little bit fast, but what I want you to get is that it's a reaction, right? The guy's jumping up and then making the jump kind of bevel to go with him. There we go, that's what we want. The guy could probably move a little bit faster, but I think you guys kind of get the idea. So jump, and then he's up, and then he's down. All right, so that's kind of like a reaction thing, right? And so things like that can look really neat in your animation. So don't kind of hesitate to introduce those things in as well. Okay, so up and down. All right. This last one, so we've got some windy text here. I've got a couple of leaves that are actually off of the screen. Whoops. So I've got one right there. I've got a couple of them that I think I've changed what they actually are. And then the other thing too is the background by itself, right here where I had the text, is just a little bit too chaotic. So I just painted in with like a gray color to put the text over top of it. All right, so that way you could see the actual text. So go ahead and create the video timeline. And what we're going to focus on here is just the word windy. So I want to make it look like it's actually kind of flapping in the wind. So I am going to click on the stopwatch for transform. And then I want to come down maybe right here and I'll hit Command, whoops, I'll hit Command or Control T. Maybe once this starts working. Oh, there we go. I had something selected off screen and that's why it wasn't working. So I had to hit Command D and that fixed it. Okay, so I'm going to hit Command T or Control T. And I don't want to just scale it or rotate it. I'm going to right click inside of here and I'm going to choose Skew. And then I am going to really kind of push that way and then hit return. And look, maybe you can kind of get like the idea that we're kind of going for. And then I'm going to move it back further. And again, I'm going to hit Command T, right click, skew, and just going to kind of be making this look like it's flapping in the wind. You can go in whatever frame segments you want. It doesn't have to be the same ones that I'm doing. I'm just kind of doing this randomly, honestly. So I would do this a little bit and then see how it looks. And then I would play it and see if you need to change anything about it. Okay, so maybe it kind of like, yeah, so it's really windy, and then, you know, I don't like the way that comes back like that. So maybe there, okay? So there we go, look, we kind of got it like flapping in the wind there, really just kind of stressing how windy it is. And then what I'm going to do is I want to take one of these leaves, and I'm just going to use my move tool and show you. It's off the screen there. See, there's that leaf. And I had already put it on its own layer. So I'm going to make it kind of come in and fly through the scene. And I actually have a couple of leaves. I'm not going to animate all of them. You could, but I'm not going to. So what I am going to do is, because I know I'm going to probably rotate this, I need to convert it to a smart object. So I'm going to right click on this layer in the layers panel and choose convert to smart object. And whenever I do that, you'll see that I have for instead of position, it says transform. So I'm going to click the stopwatch. And I don't want anything to happen just yet. I'm going to wait until windy kind of does its thing for a little bit. I'm going to put another stopwatch here just because I don't want anything to happen between this time. And then, let's see, maybe right here, I'm going to kind of bring that leaf in. Okay, so that kind of comes in slow. Let's move it a little bit closer. So there, And then maybe here, I'm gonna start to rotate it. Okay, so let's see how that looks. Okay, so it comes up. I can rotate it some more. Let's see. Okay, it looks like it just kind of stays there, so I actually have to move it up some more. Comes up, rotates, there we go. Rotate it some more. So it should be over here now. Whoop. Nope. Put it up higher. There we go. This is going to be the slowest rotation in this windy weather here, but rotates. Keep going, and I'm just hitting Command T to do this. Let's see. Loop and back through, and then we'll bring it down here. Let's see. Loop, loop, come down. And then maybe we'll just bring it out. All right, let's take a look. Comes in, loops. Okay, so that last one happens a little bit too fast. Let's drag this keyframe out, and that will extend that time. All right, there we go. Oops, looks like I need to bring it down just a little bit further. There we go. Okay, so you could do the rest with the other leaves, but I just kind of wanted to show that to you because I think that was could be pretty helpful. So just wanted to kind of show those to you. Okay, so whenever I'm done, I can just save this by going to File, Save, or Save As, or the shortcut keys for those if you want. The other way that you want to save is by rendering the video, and this is what's going to actually give you the MP4 or MOV file that you could submit to social media. So what I want to do is come up to File, Export, and then want to go down to Render Video. In this dialog that comes up, you want to select the folder that you want to save it to. In this case, I'm just going to save it to the desktop and give it a name. So you could call it wind, leave it .mp4. And you want to keep the same settings that I have here, except for, on yours, you might be working with a different size, so your size might be a little bit different. For this particular demo, it should be the same. So we want to leave this at document size. You could tell it to only export out from a certain frame range. Okay, so right now I have 149 frames. If I only wanted it to export out to like frame 10, then I could put 10 in here and select this radio button. The work area, let me hit cancel here for a second. If I wanted it to only render out this much of the video, then I could adjust my work area to be just right there. And I could go to File, Export, Render Video, and then I could choose work area. So you can see that's 88 frames, or I could just do all frames. All right, I'll just do work area for this one, and then I'm going to hit render. And this is where it might take a moment. So if you had something else running on your computer, I would definitely close it. All right, and here we have it. So you can double click on this. And when you play, there it is, and it will play for you. Okay, so that's it. If you have any questions, be sure to ask.